The Edmonton Oilers picked up a much-needed 3-2 victory over the Anaheim Ducks on Friday night on today's edition of Locked On Oilers.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Saturday morning edition of Locked On Oilers. I'm your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everyone who's making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And on today's show, we're going to walk through the much-needed 3-2 overtime win against the Ducks. We'll unpack if the Oilers do actually have a defending a late lead problem. We'll talk about Draisaitl's heroics, and we'll talk about the quick turnaround the game against the Kraken at the Kraken tonight. But this game unfolded very familiarly, if you've watched the last few weeks of Oilers hockey, where they got out to a good lead. They were playing really good hockey for the first period and a half of this game. When you got the multi-goal lead, you're comfortable, you're feeling good about how you're playing. It really becomes a matter of, can we salt this game away? And that's really one of the true and tested signs of a quality hockey team is even when you have the high-end talent that the Oilers do, you have the discipline to keep working that clock. And in football, we hand the ball off to our running back, or we have the quarterback run the ball. We stay in between the hashes. We keep the clock moving. We take our time in the huddle. In hockey, that's crossing the red line, dumping the puck in, going to get it, and forcing the other team to play defense. I thought the Adam Henrique line did a nice job of that at points during the seconds and third periods of this game. They mentioned that on the broadcast as well. I felt that the Oilers opened up a smidge because they were trying to counterattack off of the Ducks' desperation, and that trade-off is built into how the Oilers play. We've long established that when the Oilers are at their best, they're kind of opening the game up and down, back and forth, and trying to pick you apart systematically. And instead, the Oilers had chances. You know, that they drove the net very well in this game. I felt the Oilers did a really good job of forcing the Ducks to defend individually to a man, of putting pressure on, driving the net, and forcing Ducks defensemen to move their feet and pressure. You know, I think it was Jeff Skinner who had a really nice run on Radko Gudas, and Gudas ultimately won the leverage battle and got a stick in the way. McDavid did it a few times as well. The Oilers were able to create chances, but for whatever reason this year, they just haven't been as fortunate or as lucky with some of the bounces in these close games. And when the Ducks tied this game, I definitely got a little bit antsy. And I do think there is something to it. And yes, in an ideal world, in a game where you play as well as you do on the underlyings, and we'll talk about those later, when you play as well as you did on the underlyings, you had the puck as much as you did in this game, you probably feel like you should have scored 3 or 4 goals. And if you make a mistake or two, it shouldn't come back to bite you. You know, I'm really having a difficult time assessing how Evan Bouchard keeps getting so unlucky, because there's a consensus. Well, I shouldn't say a consensus. There's an old saying in hockey that the puck finds good players and good players find the puck. And Bouchard, make no mistake, is a very good hockey player. I do think he's one of the 10 to 15 best defensemen in the world. I don't think he's playing as well right now as he was in the postseason last year. So that's why I've opened it a little bit more from top 10 to probably more closer to top 15. But the Oilers and Bouchard, for whatever reason, the game looks a smidge fast for him, and his game is processing. His game is reads, it's IQ, it's positioning. It is not foot speed, it is not size. And when you have small mistakes. The pass Connor Brown gives him that leads to the first Anaheim goal, that's a tough pass. I'm not getting on Bouchard in particular for that pass handcuffing him, skipping over his stick and letting the Ducks go the other way and score. I'm just saying that it's happened a lot this year where Bouchard has made a mistake or just had the misfortune of a puck skipping on him. And when that happens over and over and over and over again, it does lend itself a question of, well, what are we doing that keeps making this happen? And the natural retort to that, and something I had a back and forth with somebody on Twitter about during the game, is you need Skinner to be better on those breakaways. But again, as we've long since established here on Locked On Oilers, if we need Stuart Skinner to be the difference between winning and losing, we're probably not going to have that good of a time. But if Stuart Skinner just needs to chip in a handful of difficult saves, we control the majority of the play, and he doesn't have to do a whole lot, that's where we're really going to be able to put something special together. And the way the Oilers are built, and look, I know Lucas Dostal is a good goalie. I know the Ducks have really found something in their young goaltender there, but the Oilers need to be able to find more than 2 or 3 goals a night. The Ducks are not a good team. When you start to pick them apart defensively and you go player by player, yeah, I like Radko Gudas. He's fine. But Trouba, Brian Dumoulin, these are slow-footed, clunky individuals that you can really target and put in uncomfortable positions. And the Oilers did that to some extent. But when the issue with finishing has been as consistent as it's been this season, that lends me to believe it might be something else. Are we taking lower quality scoring chances? Are we not driving the net as much? Are we not creating goalie movement as much? There are a ton of variables that go into a given play. Now, enough of me doing the woe is me, are the Oilers in trouble spiel. The Oilers played pretty well tonight. When you go under the hood and look, the only thing they lost on was shots on goal tonight. Other than that, they had a 58-47 advantage in scoring chances, a 12-6 advantage in high danger scoring chances, a 3.13 to a 1.84 expected goals advantage. They scored on their one power play opportunity. They conceded one of the 2 power play opportunities that the Ducks had. They had a reasonably functional night. They just couldn't get the bounces to go in to really differentiate or separate in this game. And that's why it comes down to, the last handful of minutes of the game where it becomes mano-a-mano, stars on stars. And all the kudos in the world to Draisaitl for the play. And we'll talk about Leon in the second segment. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but on a night where you didn't get anything from McDavid on the stat sheet, Hyman was in the right place for the Nuge goal, but he ultimately didn't tap it in. When you find a way, and shout out to Darnell Nurse for his contribution in this game, that was a really nice goal, and he caught Dostal off guard, and when you beat the goalie clean as a defenseman, and again, this is something else they talked about on the broadcast, when you look up as the goalie and you just kind of nod like, wow, he beat me clean like that, that tells you it was a really good shot. So this is a good win. And it's a good win because you didn't go to overtime. You put this game away, and now we move on. After losing to the Ducks the way they did on Sunday, putting this away, tying a bow on it, home ice, Friday night, good vibes into the weekend. You got a back-to-back. That's a little bit tough on the mentals. We'll talk more about that later, too. We're going to take our first break of today's edition of Locked On Oilers. When we come back, we'll talk about Draisaitl's heroics and a whole lot more, so be sure to stick around. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a W, like player props for who will score a touchdown, receptions, yards, and so much more. Today, we've got 2 games. The Browns heading to Baltimore, where the Baltimore Ravens are 19.5-point favorites. Then later in the evening, the Bengals heading to Pittsburgh, to try and keep their playoff hopes alive, where the Bengals are 2.5-point favorites. And then Sunday night, game of the year potential, the Vikings heading to Detroit to take on the Lions with the division crown and the number 1 seed up for grabs. So if you want to get in on the action, visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you to everyone who's hanging out on this Friday night, Saturday morning edition of Locked On Oilers, where we're talking about the 3-2 win over the Anaheim Ducks. And it's always intriguing to watch how co-superstars manage their dynamics, because it varies a lot sport to sport, team to team. I think it's really important that if you are trying to maintain a long-term window of competitiveness, you want to try and find a way to foster those relationships best you can from an organizational perspective. You know, you think about some of the really potent and dynamic duos in other sports where the Bengals are going to do everything in their power to keep Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase together. You think about some of the potent combos in basketball where you're going to do everything in your power if you're the Lakers to keep LeBron and Anthony Davis together, even if the quality of your team isn't championship caliber. The Suns, the same thing, trading for KD to line him up with Devin Booker. In hockey, it's a little bit different, just because there aren't that many of these superstar caliber players out there. And the ones there are out there, it's usually cost prohibitive to have multiple superstars in hockey. That's why what the Leafs are doing, to a lesser extent what the Lightning are doing, is a new foray, or you throw Vegas in there as well. I know Eichel isn't clearing an insane number, but Colorado will be in there once they pay Rantanen. But it's hard to manage those dynamics. And I do think the Oilers have benefited from the fact that McDavid and Draisaitl both got here as kids, and they were both able to come along and come into their owns at their own pace. And this isn't a case of, well, whose team is it? Because there is such a genuine respect between those two guys and a genuine admiration for each other that the dynamics of the team aren't in question. And something like this season, I think, is a testament to that. The simple matter of the fact is there are a lot of superstars who wouldn't want to play second fiddle to Connor McDavid and would have tried to leverage their way out of here last summer into the walk year of their contract to try and have their own team, because that does matter to some guys. You know, if you ask certain people, that's what they would tell you why Juan Soto left the Yankees to go to the Mets, because he wanted to be the face of a team. And instead, you have a player putting together one of the great seasons of the modern NHL, where Draisaitl, who's always been a potent, dangerous offensive player, has added quality defensive impacts while playing a majority of his minutes with non-superstar talent. You know, Leon's not getting the Zach Hyman bump. He's not getting the McDavid bump. Sure, McNoblock has used McDavid and Hyman with Draisaitl more this year than last year, at least so far, because the Oilers have been a little more desperate for offense in some of these games coming down the stretch. I know coming off of penalty kills where neither Connor nor Leon kills penalties, so the Oilers are inclined to get them out there for a quick shift together after a penalty kill. But Leon putting together the season he is showing such a resilience and determination in these gutsy situations where he is facing the glass at the right point of the offensive zone. He has Mason McTavish, who's a big guy. Mason McTavish, you go look him up. He's tall. He's a strong kid. And he's got Mason McTavish bearing down on him, trying to out-leverage him, to outwork him for a puck. Leon looking over his shoulder, kicks the puck to the middle of the ice behind him. Once he's released, because McTavish has to let him go, otherwise it's interference, Draisaitl is able to leak into some open space. The puck skips because it's deflected on the way back from Kulak towards Draisaitl. It finds Draisaitl with a ton of open space, and Leon just picks a corner. And those types of effort plays aren't what show up in the box score. And a lot of the time, something like that isn't going to result in a goal. Winning that puck battle, winning that board battle, out leveraging someone who frankly probably has a bit better positioning than you because they have a little bit more room than you. That type of play doesn't show up in the stat sheet an awful lot, frankly. And this one only shows up because it manifests into a scoring play. If this sequence ends in a post, if this sequence ends in a post or hitting the glass or a save, it's a nice play, but because it's ultimately the catalyst for a goal, that's why it's memorable. And Leon's had his fair share of those extra effort plays where he's outworked somebody, he's dove to get his stick in the way or to make that extra pass. And that's the sign of a player who gets it. And there are never going to be questions about commitment on this team because the guys who are here get it. After what you went through last year, that really puts some calluses on your hands. That really toughens you up as an individual to have the season you did last year where you go through the adversity of starting as slow as you did, of losing a coach, of getting a coach fired, the guilt of dealing with that, having to learn what a new coach wants you to do, going on the crazy winning streaks, going all the way to a cup final, going down 3-0, getting to a game 7, losing in a game 7. And I expected it would be Connor McDavid that was going to have the Terminator season, that he was just going to be 2012 LeBron on the Heat after losing to the Mavericks. And this was going to be the best hockey team in the entire league because the best player in the world was playing with real vengeance and hate in his heart. And instead, it's been Draisaitl that's been playing like the Terminator. And unfortunately, he did snap his penalty streak tonight when he and Trouba got into that after the whistle. And look, if you're familiar with my Rangers work, you know what I think of Jacob Trouba. I think he's a performative overactor. I think he is an extremely, extremely overrated hockey player who is coasted by on his reputation from his time in Winnipeg, where he was never actually as good as his counting stats. The 150-point season in a walk year, the Rangers bought in on that. They made him captain after they went to the conference finals. There's a reason he's in Anaheim. And I think the 2 games they've played against the Ducks, Trouba's looked a lot better playing for the Ducks than he did at any point playing for the Rangers this year, because I think he's no longer actively sandbagging the way he was in New York, where he was just showing no real effort to play defense, to make good decisions, or frankly do anything to help the hockey team win. He just simply was pulling the jersey over his head, going out there and seeing what happened for the vibes. But it's a shame that Leon ended his penalty streak, because I think that's a real testament to the fact how focused and how on task he's been, that he's carrying a line with bottom 6 forwards for most of the season. They're having really good defensive impacts. He is having the best season of his career so far, still leading the league in goals. He scored his 9th game-winning goal of the season tonight, the game winner against the Ducks. And if you've got that going, and McDavid's just casually putting together another 110-point season, you really got to be licking your chops, because somewhere in there McDavid's going to supernova for a week or two. McDavid's going to put up 35 points in 15 games at some point before the end of the season. That's just who he is. That's how good he is. And when you have that in the chamber, and you have Bouchard, who's had his ups and downs still with a little bit of meat on the bone, and you're expecting Hyman to keep up the pace he's put up since coming back from injury, and you think you can squeeze probably a little bit more out of Nuge, you probably can squeeze a little bit more out of Adam Henrique, out of Connor Brown, out of Arvidsson, out of Jeff Skinner, all of that. And with the record where it's at, where they're 3rd in the Pacific now, you have to lick your chops a little bit and think there's a lot left we can accomplish here. We're going to take one more break on today's show. We'll talk about the game against the Kraken and send you guys into the weekend the right way. If you guys know one thing about me in my time as host of Locked On Oilers, I love going to events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or comedy. one of my favorite moments of last year was going to Creed with my friends up in Saratoga, visited my friend's dad, stayed at his place. Just an incredible vibe. Lawn seats at an outdoor concert at a small venue are always an immaculate time if you can swing it and the weather's right. Now, Gametime has made it even easier to get tickets to your favorite events with their new feature, Gametime Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Recently, my friends and I were looking at getting Rangers tickets, even though the team has been miserable, using the Gametime app. And with Gametime Picks, we found amazing deals and we could see the view from our seats before buying. If we end up pulling the trigger, the only place we're going to get these tickets from is through Gametime. The super deal, particularly impressive, offering great seats at an unbeatable price. Plus, the app's all-in pricing shows the total cost up front with no surprise fees at checkouts. So, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. And thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Friday night, Saturday morning edition of Locked On Oilers. As promised, had to make up the episode for Wednesday. Still not 100% after the Friday episode about Jonathan Toews. I took like a 5-hour nap, and I felt a lot better since taking that nap. But hopefully by Monday, I'm 100%, and I can get back to the normally scheduled programming, because it's miserable being sick, man. It really is just so tiring and so draining, but grateful to be feeling better. Tuesday and Wednesday were not fun. Did not get to enjoy the college football playoff nearly as much as I wanted to. Spent most of it in a haze sleeping, in all honesty. But as far as the game against Seattle, logic would tell you the Oilers are probably going to do their post-game stuff. I was looking at some scrums, listening to some sound bites, and they're probably going to get on a plane tonight, get to Seattle so they can just sleep and get in as early as they can. Not a particularly short flight from Edmonton to Seattle, but the sooner you're on location, the better. The sooner you get on the plane. Most guys probably take a nap on the plane. You get to the hotel probably local time, probably 3 a.m.-ish, 4 a.m.-ish, and you sleep most of the day. You have a 7 o'clock puck drop, so you probably don't have to be at the rink till a little after 4. You get most of tomorrow to just rest through the morning. If you need treatment, you probably get up a little bit earlier to get treatment. But other than that, the back-to-back split where it's not both home games, it's a little bit tough on the mentals. You know, the Oilers have had a few days here, but a back-to-back where one of the games is on the road, it's challenging, and it's something that the Oilers are going to have their work cut out for them. Seattle is not a particularly good team, but Seattle works hard. You know, that's one of the real principles of a Ron Francis built team, is that idea that we are just going to skate and skate and skate, and we're going to wear you out. And I think Seattle, for all of their faults and their lack of high-end talent, they are pretty good at that. Seattle is pretty good about cycling, making you play defense, and wearing you down. And we know it'll be Calvin Pickard because Stuart Skinner started on Friday night, and Pickard will go on the second half of a back-to-back. The Oilers have played better this season in front of Calvin Pickard through the first, through the first 25 games or so. It was about, 2 fewer scoring chances, about 1/3 fewer expected goals. There was a discernible statistical difference when the Oilers were playing in front of Pickard versus Skinner, and the Oilers are going to need to be on that tonight. They are going to need to be on their best, if you will, because when you are playing a team that isn't very talented but works hard, it is very easy to get caught up in the names in the back of the jerseys and expect to be able to pull away. These games against the mediocre and bad teams, these are opportunities to differentiate yourselves from the rest of the pack. The Oilers have enough talent where they should be able to beat most teams on talent alone, but that's not a good habit to get into. You don't want to rely on a handful of guys making great plays outside of structure because those are hard to replicate. You can't always bank on Connor or Leon or Bush to make a superstar play. It's just not a tenable path that builds good habits. You want all hands pulling in the same direction, pitching in to contribute to create what's a sustainable and replicable pattern. You want what you do in game, 43 to be able to work in game 6 of a second round, because that means you've formed really good habits. And it gets back to what we've talked a lot about this season on Locked On Oilers, the idea that we want to make incremental progress and keep building ourselves up so that because of what we did now, we're better then, and we keep building on that. It's not a linear path where A to B to C to D, but it's a gradual increase. You think about if you leave a cup under a faucet that has a slight drip to it, eventually that cup is going to build up a decent amount of water. And that's the way I like to think about a long season, is drops of water in a bucket. That, each individual drop of water doesn't matter all of that much, but when you start to put one drop after another, if you leave that cup under the sink all night and you sleep for 8 hours, by the morning, that cup's going to be half full, 3/4 full. And that is a sign of something that you have been working on. And we're not quite at the halfway point yet. We're almost there. But the Oilers are putting together a decent first half of the season, and it's a matter of building on that now. It's a matter of when we are playing a 1-goal game against one of these bad teams in our division, that we find that put-away goal, we put this game away, no overtime, no shenanigans. We get on the plane, we get to our next city, we go to sleep, we wake up, we get ready for the next game. It's monotonous, and it can be taxing mentally, but it has to be how you approach a long season. It is a cumulative effort. It does build up over time. And it is important that you put away these games against bad teams, because if you can separate yourself where you are not in the mud against these mediocre teams, you're not doing what the Islanders do, where you take every game to overtime. You're not doing the loser point path into relevancy. You are putting games away. You are building confidence. So that way, when you're in a rock fight against a Florida, against a Tampa Bay, you are prepared and you can win that rock fight. There are many different ways to win a game in the NHL, but you do have to win them. That'll do it for this edition of Locked On Oilers. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please leave the show a 5-star review. I'm sure there's more than one person who listened to 2 minutes of the Jonathan Toews episode and left the show a 1-star review. So if you could balance that out, that would be great. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button to balance out anyone who unsubscribed for the Jonathan Toews episode. I'll talk to you guys on Monday. I'll see you guys then.